Imagine you are standing in the most feared building on Earth. The corridors are silent, the floors are cold marble. The air smells of cigarette smoke, old paper, and something else. Something you cannot quite name but instinctively recognize as danger. You walk past doors that do not open, past offices where men sit behind desks deciding the fates of other men, past filing cabinets that contain the carefully documented sins of an entire civilization. And then you reach it, a safe, heavy, private, personal, locked not by the state but by one man for one man's purposes alone. And when that safe is finally opened, when the cold steel door swings back and the contents are revealed to the stunned eyes of those who find it, there are no missile launch codes inside. There are no stolen Western military secrets. There are no revolutionary manifestos or encrypted diplomatic cables. There are photographs. Photographs of women, wives of powerful men, captured in private moments, preserved with deliberate, calculating intention. Now ask yourself one question. In a building that held the darkest secrets of the most powerful empire of the 20th century, what does it mean that the darkest secret of all was not about the enemies of the state, but about the men who ran it? Welcome to the Lubyanka. Welcome to the truth that power has always tried to keep locked away. The Lubyanka building stands at the heart of Moscow, on Lubyanka Square. And for most of the 20th century, it represented something far beyond mere architecture. It was the physical embodiment of Soviet state terror, a place where the machinery of repression operated around the clock, hidden behind a facade of bureaucratic normalcy. Originally built in 1898 as the headquarters of an insurance company, the building was seized after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 and transformed into the operational base of the Cheka, the first Soviet secret police organization. From that moment forward, it passed through various institutional identities, the OGPU, the NKVD, the MGB, and finally the KGB, but its essential character never changed. It remained a place of absolute power, absolute secrecy, and absolute terror. The building had multiple floors dedicated to different functions, ranging from administrative offices and intelligence analysis rooms to interrogation chambers buried deep within its lower levels. Prisoners were brought in through concealed entrances, processed in complete anonymity, and in many cases never seen again by their families. The building also housed one of the most sophisticated internal communication and surveillance networks in the world, allowing senior officials to monitor conversations, track movements, and compile dossiers on virtually anyone within the Soviet sphere. What made the Lubyanka particularly sinister was its ordinariness from the outside. Muscovites walked past it every day, shopped in the nearby stores, and rode the metro beneath its foundations, all while unspeakable things occurred just meters away. It was this contrast between surface normalcy and hidden horror that made the Lubyanka such a powerful symbol. Even today, decades after the fall of the Soviet Union, the building continues to serve as the headquarters of the FSB, the modern successor to the KGB, ensuring that its shadow over Russian political life has never truly lifted. The word Компромат is a contraction of the Russian phrase meaning compromising material, and understanding it is essential to understanding how Soviet and post-Soviet power actually functioned at its deepest levels. Compromat was not simply blackmail in the conventional sense. It was an entire institutional culture, a way of thinking about human relationships, political alliances, and organizational loyalty that permeated every level of the Soviet system, from the local party secretary all the way to the uppermost reaches of the Politburo. The KGB did not merely collect compromising material as a side activity or as an occasional tool of last resort. It systematized the process, trained officers specifically in its gathering and management, and built entire operational frameworks around the idea that every person of significance had vulnerabilities that could be identified, documented, and weaponized when necessary. Officers were taught to look for financial irregularities, romantic indiscretions, ideological doubts, family connections to enemies of the state, and personal vices of every conceivable kind. Once identified, these vulnerabilities were carefully documented with photographs, audio recordings, written reports from informants, and any other form of evidence that could be preserved and produced at a critical moment. What made Compromat culture so corrosive was that it created an environment of universal suspicion in which nobody, regardless of their rank or their loyalty, could feel entirely safe. Even the most devoted Communist Party member knew that somewhere in the Lubyanka's vast filing system, there was likely a folder with their name on it. This knowledge was not incidental to the system's functioning. It was central to it. A population, and more importantly a ruling class that lived in permanent fear of exposure, was a population that could be controlled, directed, and silenced with remarkable efficiency. The culture of Compromat also bred a particular kind of political personality, calculating, paranoid, outwardly conformist, and inwardly consumed by the management of their own secrets while simultaneously seeking out the secrets of others. The Soviet intelligence apparatus under the KGB developed surveillance capabilities that extended far beyond the monitoring of political dissidents or foreign spies. At its most invasive, the system reached directly into the bedrooms, dining rooms, and private conversations of the Soviet elite itself, creating a world in which even the highest-ranking officials could never be certain that their most intimate moments were truly private. This surveillance of personal lives was not a rogue operation conducted by individual officers acting outside their mandate. It was an officially sanctioned, methodically organized component of the KGB's overall mission to maintain control over Soviet society. Safe houses were equipped with hidden microphones and cameras. Hotel rooms used by senior officials and foreign diplomats were routinely fitted with concealed recording equipment. Domestic staff, drivers, secretaries, and personal assistants were frequently recruited as informants, tasked with reporting on the private behaviors and conversations of the people they served. Foreign embassies in Moscow were subjected to such intensive technical surveillance that Western intelligence services spent enormous resources simply trying to identify and neutralize the listening devices planted within their walls. But the surveillance of personal lives went beyond technical methods. The KGB also deployed human intelligence in the form of agents who cultivated genuine personal relationships with targets over months or even years, all while secretly reporting on their subjects' private thoughts, emotional vulnerabilities, political doubts, and personal relationships. The information gathered through these methods was not always used immediately. Often it was filed away, cross-referenced with other intelligence, and held in reserve for a moment when it might prove most useful. This created a system of deferred power in which senior officials accumulated vast stores of personal information about colleagues and rivals. Information that could sit quietly in a safe for years before being deployed with devastating effect at precisely the right political moment. Throughout human history, knowledge has always been a form of power. But within the specific context of the Soviet intelligence world, this principle was taken to an extreme that transformed the entire nature of political relationships at the highest levels of the state. Senior KGB figures did not merely possess secrets as a byproduct of their professional duties. They actively cultivated, expanded, and personally managed private collections of sensitive information as a deliberate strategy for accumulating and protecting their own power within an extraordinarily dangerous political environment. To understand why this happened, it is necessary to appreciate just how precarious life at the top of the Soviet system actually was. The Communist Party was not a stable meritocracy in which talent and loyalty reliably translated into career advancement and personal safety. It was an arena of constant factional competition, sudden reversals of fortune, and potentially lethal political defeat. Men who were celebrated as heroes of the revolution could find themselves arrested, tortured, and executed within months. Given this reality, the possession of compromising information about powerful colleagues and rivals was not simply a professional tool, it was a form of personal insurance. A man who held damaging secrets about a Politburo member, a military commander, or a fellow intelligence chief possessed something that functioned like a shield. The implicit understanding was that any move against him could be met with the release or threatened release of information that would be equally devastating to his attacker. This created a complex web of mutual deterrence among the Soviet elite, a kind of political balance of terror that in some ways mirrored the nuclear standoff between the superpowers. Personal dossiers, private photographs, recorded conversations, and written confessions extracted under duress all became components of an informal but very real system of power that operated alongside, and often in tension with, the official structures of party and state authority. Among the many operational techniques developed and refined by Soviet intelligence over the decades, the honey trap occupies a particularly prominent place in the history of espionage, precisely because it exploited the most fundamental and universal of human vulnerabilities. The honey trap, known in Russian intelligence circles by various operational terms, was a method in which an attractive and carefully trained agent, male or female depending on the target, was deployed to seduce a person of intelligence interest, creating a compromising situation that could then be documented and used for blackmail, recruitment, or the simple neutralization of a potential threat. What distinguished the Soviet version of this technique from more improvised forms of sexual entrapment was the extraordinary degree of planning, patience, and professional sophistication that went into its execution. Agents selected for honey trap operations underwent extensive preparation that covered not just the obvious requirements of personal appearance and social charm, but also deep psychological training in how to identify and exploit emotional vulnerabilities, how to build genuine-seeming romantic connections, and how to guide a relationship toward a moment of maximum compromising exposure while maintaining complete operational security. Targets ranged from foreign diplomats and military attachés to domestic party officials, scientists with access to sensitive research, and even the spouses and family members of primary targets. The documentation of these operations, the photographs, film recordings, and written reports, was treated as highly valuable intelligence product, carefully preserved and filed in ways that made it retrievable and usable long after the initial operation had concluded. The existence of such material in personal safes, rather than in official archives, suggests that senior officers sometimes retained copies of the most sensitive operational products for their own private use, blurring the line between official intelligence work and personal accumulation of power. One of the most revealing aspects of how power actually functioned within the KGB and the broader Soviet security apparatus was the widespread practice among senior officials of maintaining personal safes and private document collections that were entirely separate from the official filing and archival systems of their organizations. This phenomenon, which might be described as a parallel intelligence infrastructure existing within the official one, speaks volumes about the fundamental nature of trust and loyalty within an institution theoretically dedicated to the protection of the Soviet state. Official KGB archives were, of course, themselves extraordinarily secret and carefully controlled. Access was restricted, contents were classified, and the movement of documents within the system was tracked and logged. But precisely because official archives were accessible to others within the hierarchy, superiors who could order reviews, successors who would inherit responsibilities, internal security units that periodically audited compliance, they could not serve as truly safe repositories for the most sensitive and personally valuable materials an officer might accumulate over a career. And so the personal safe became an institution within the institution. Behind locked doors in private offices, in apartments, in dachas outside Moscow, senior figures stored materials that represented their most important personal assets: the photographs, the recorded conversations, the written confessions, the private correspondence that gave them leverage over others, and that they absolutely could not afford to have fallen into the wrong hands. These personal collections were carefully curated over years and decades, representing the accumulated intelligence harvest of an entire career. They were also extraordinarily dangerous to possess, because the existence of such a private archive, if discovered, immediately raised questions about what the officer intended to do with the material and who else might be implicated in it. The discovery of such materials after a senior official's death or removal from power was therefore always a moment of intense political sensitivity, as colleagues and rivals scrambled to understand what secrets had been kept and what leverage might now shift to whoever gained control of the contents.